Hello everyone, my name is Angelique Opie. I am normally the property editor for Channel 7 News Sydney. Today I am hosting Settlement Day, the first edition of Australia Conveyancer magazine's podcast. It covers a topic of compelling interest to property professionals. That is the looming of Tranche 2 of Australia's anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing regulations. They already embrace banks, clubs, pubs and casinos. Soon, conveyancers, lawyers, real estate agents and accountants will be included. Among our guests today, we have the man overseeing the implementation of these regulations, Brendan Thomas, the Chief Executive of Australia's financial regulator, AUSTRAC. Welcome.
Thank you, Angelique.
And we also have Jennie, the Australian Institute of Conveyancers President for the New South Wales Division, and Shakila Maclean, the President for the Victorian Division. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Let's start off with you, Brendan. Walk us through, how did we get here? Why are these reforms important?
So the anti-money laundering legislation in Australia deals with quite a significant problem. We do have a major problem of illicit finance in Australia. We estimate that there's about $68 billion worth of illicit finance flowing through the Australian economy. And our intelligence does show a significant proportion of that finance going into Australian real estate. We have the challenge of not only dealing with money laundering and illicit finance, but criminals trying to store their wealth somewhere. And they're often looking for places where they can hide it or keep it for long periods of time without losing value. And so we see Australian criminal organisations and criminal organisations from overseas storing illicit wealth in the purchases of Australian real estate. And that's not only an Australian problem, it's a global problem. And the regulations that we're bringing in Australia have been applicable to most countries in the world for some time. Australia really is behind the eight ball in protecting its economy from illicit finance. And so these changes that are coming into place next year really bring us into line with the rest of the world.
So what have you taken from the overseas experience then? Will Australia be better?
We will be better. We've paid a lot of attention to the implementation of these changes in a number of other jurisdictions. We've spoken closely to our counterparts in other countries, particularly recently in New Zealand, about their experience in implementing these kinds of changes. And one of the things we've learned very clearly is to listen clearly to the needs of industry and business, and very much to focus on the concerns of small business in how we design this anti-money laundering regime and how we're going about implementing these changes.
Jennie and Shakila, both of you are conveyancers and are aware of the cost and administrative burden of compliance. What do you make of what Brendan has outlined?
There's definitely an issue in this country that is ever increasing that we've become aware of. And I fully understand why conveyancing legal firms, real estate agents need to get on board with AML. As the representative of my conveyancing members in New South Wales, majority of our members are very small businesses. So for me, the key is to make sure that we don't lose small businesses with the cost of implementing what is required, and that we get the assistance we need to be able to get our members ready for when it starts next year.
Shakila, do you feel ready?
No, we don't feel ready. There's still a few unknowns, grey areas. And I know that AUSTRAC are trying to support the legal and conveyancing industry. And my question to Brendan is, how is it that they will be sort of supporting us down the track as we sort of get close to the D-Day?
Yeah, so the legislation was passed in November last year. And since then, we've been working very closely with all of the industries that are coming under our regulation next year. Firstly, in designing the rules, which is kind of the next level of detail that sits under the legislation. We also then subsequently recently published guidance, which is the next level of detail again. And in developing both the rules and the guidance, we've had intensive engagement with all of those industry sectors. Huge amounts of feedback. We had more than 160 submissions to the first consultation process and more than 140 to the second one. And we've really listened to what industry have told us and have made significant adjustments to the rules and the guidance that have come out. The next phase of the work that we're doing is guidance for specific industries, so guidance for conveyancers. And most importantly, one of the things we're really focused on is the development of what we call starter programs. And this is where we're really differing from other countries around the world who've implemented these changes. We really understand that we're dealing with a large number of small businesses. The last thing you want to worry about is additional regulation and additional cost and additional burden. And we also appreciate people like conveyancers really don't know anything about money laundering or financial crime.
That's right.
And all of this is quite new to people. And so the focus on these starter programs, we will give you everything you need to know as a small business person to be able to comply with the law. So we'll tell you what the risks are that we expect you to face from money laundering and illicit finance. And we'll give you details of how to run a money laundering program and the steps that you need to take to put that in place to comply with the law.
Perhaps a question on the timeline for you both. Would you like to ask about
I have to say it's great that AUSTRAC are providing these starter kits. I understand that they went around to all the countries, asked what the issues were, and it became quite obvious that something like a starter kit needed to be given. We were told last week that we're not going to get the starter kits before Christmas. It is probably the number one fear of our members nationwide, that they're still not able to get concrete information as to what they've got to do. And in terms of the industry and the institutes, it's delaying us being able to set up our conferences, our training and education just of the compliance officer. So I understand that's now been delayed to the end of January. Can you confirm that it won't be delayed again?
Yes, so they'll be coming out in January.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is we've gone through a number of different rounds of consultation in the development of these starter programs. And we've involved small businesses in the development of those programs. We really wanted to make sure that the voice of small business was in there and that we were listening to the way people operate their businesses. And through those iterations, we've got extensive feedback from those business people about what they want to see in those starter programs. And because of that feedback, they're taking slightly longer to develop. But because it's taking slightly longer to develop, it will be a much more comprehensive starter program than we'd originally envisaged. And so your time frame to implement that program should be shorter because that program will have more comprehension in it.
So there'll be like a toolkit that we can have that will help us, right, how do we set up our program?
Yeah,
and
very
it will
much
give
so.
us the steps as to how to do that.
It will give you the program. It won't just give you the steps. It will give you the bulk of what you need to do.
That's great.
Yeah.
And we can expect that in January?
You can expect that in January, yeah.
Okay. And then once we've got the starter kits and now we know there's a date that everyone has to be enrolled by, and is it fair to expect full compliance from day one? Is that what AUSTRAC's expectation is?
Yeah, it certainly isn't. So there's a period of time when we ask businesses to enrol with us. So that's between March and July next year. And we've invested a lot of time and effort into new online tools to make that registration process as straightforward and simple as it possibly can be. And those new websites will be launched later this year, so you'll be able to have a look at those shortly. But we certainly don't expect people to be perfect from July next year when those compliance obligations start. We expect it to be quite a learning curve for people, one, to understand what financial crime is and to understand what you need to do to comply with these new anti-money laundering laws. And we'll work with you, particularly yourselves as representatives of your industry, in every step of the way to make sure that we're listening to your experience of being regulated and listening to your experience of implementing those starter programs and providing direct feedback to you on how that performance is going. But we certainly don't expect perfection from day one. We expect people to gradually come into this and to get better as they do it more often.
So the only expectation at the moment is to register?
So to register with us between March and July.
That's really what the main expectation is.
And then to commence the implementation of your starter programs from
1 July.
1 July.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
And I think, the messaging also needs to be, and what we're hearing from members is, if I don't do something by a particular date, or if I don't lodge a suspicious report because I haven't really seen anything and it turns out that it is actually high-level suspicion, am I going to get fined? $19,000 is that number that keeps going around. Can you give us some sort of more clarity around what those fines are?
Yeah, so we don't do that.
Yeah.
So if people are honestly trying to comply with the law, whether they're doing it perfectly or not, we won't fine people. We never have, and we won't in this instance. The only people we pursue for penalties are people who are completely doing the wrong thing, who are completely ignoring their legal obligations. People
like deliberately
ignoring it. People who are turning a blind eye to crime and criminality and profiting from crime. And I mean, if you look at the track record of AUSTRAC, we have received some pretty significant penalties against big corporate bodies in Australia, but we've never pursued any small businesses for not ticking the right box or failing small elements of their programs. That just has never happened, and we have no intention of doing that. So people that are worried about getting some kind of $19,000 fine because they haven't filled in the right form or they haven't submitted the right report, they don't need to worry about that from us.
Would AUSTRAC consider creating something like a feedback loop if, conveyancers can receive anonymised case studies or trend reports? Is that something that AUSTRAC would consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've changed the way we work in the course of the last year. We've established a new industry engagement branch, and we've done that specifically so that we're always talking to the industries that we're involved in regulating, so that we're getting direct feedback from those industries about their experience of regulation, also getting feedback from those industries about experience of crime, and ways in which we can then use the intelligence that we get to better inform those industries about the nature of crime that we're seeing people experiencing and what's working to prevent that crime. So certainly that feedback loop, you'll see much more from us once you start implementing your programs and come under our regulation. And we're significantly changing the way we work so that we are providing more direct, real-time, regular feedback to business.
If, say, on the nature of crime, if a conveyancer reports a suspicious client, would AUSTRAC have some sort of plan to protect the conveyancer and their families from any retaliation?
Yeah. It is a common question I've heard from conveyancers. If I submit a suspicious matter report, is that person going to know that, and is my safety at risk? The answer is no. And if I can explain why, when you submit a suspicious matter report to us, that report is protected by the money laundering law from being made public or being used again. What we do with that report is we turn that into financial intelligence. We provide it to law enforcement bodies, but it in itself can't be used in a prosecution. So if you provide a suspicious matter report to us and a person ends up facing a criminal charge as a result of that, the report that you've provided can't be used in court. It can't be given to that person as evidence, and the police need to build additional evidence on which to make that charge separate to that suspicious matter report. So it is what it says it is. It's reporting a suspicion. It's not the equivalent of making a report to the police or submitting a crime report to the police.
So it's like a very high-level Crime Stoppers.
It's a suspicion, yeah. And it can't in its own right be used for prosecution. So what happens is we get those reports. Often we'll get multiple reports on the same person from a whole range of different entities. We'll turn that into financial intelligence and work with police on understanding the nature of the criminality, and the police will then go and develop their own evidence and their own case and bring charges against that person. So the suspicious matter report is the thing that informs that, but it doesn't form the basis of the prosecution that goes forward.
Do either of you have concerns about potential red flags and being able to identify and report those to AUSTRAC?
Where we're hearing the greatest fear is in the regional areas, because everyone knows everyone. And they're sort of concerned that if they lodge a suspicious report, that their office or home's going to suddenly be hit with bullets, to the extreme. So that's where that concern is coming from, particularly in those smaller regional areas. I think it's really important to sort of emphasise that, their name will never be seen in any charges or any court proceedings. They wouldn't be asked to be at the court proceedings to be a witness or anything. So it's all about this constant education that we're still trying to give them without any sort of solid facts yet.
So
that's still coming.
If I can reassure people as well, I mean, we've been regulating businesses since 2006. We regulate around 19,000 businesses at the moment. Some of those are very big businesses, but quite a number of them are small businesses as well. And they've been giving us suspicious matter reports for that time. There's never been a threat to anybody who's submitted a suspicious matter report in Australia. And certainly talking to my colleagues around the world who have the same regime, I can't give you any examples of where there's been any threats coming from any of those either.
Anything you'd like to add on that?
I guess it's just more we've got to get that messaging out to the practitioners. I know that our practitioners are worried, like Jennie said, from the country, but even so, but I think it's important that we understand that if we make a suspicious report today, doesn't mean that tomorrow the police are going to go and act on it. I guess they've got to still find some more information and gather their information before they take the following steps. And that's probably what we need to get out to the practitioners out there.
That's right. So if one of your practitioners gives us a suspicious matter report because they can't see where a person's source of wealth comes from, for example, and they might be suspicious of how this person's got the money that they're buying the property with, that might be the source of the suspicion. That'll come to us. We'll link that with other reports that we might have on that same individual from banks or other financial institutions, and we'll then develop, if that person is suspicious, a detailed profile or detailed piece of intelligence that will then go to law enforcement. The charges that would flow for that person might be around drug dealing or arms trafficking or something like that. It won't be around the purchase of a house.
Right.
It helps us build a picture of criminality, and it often helps us build a picture of criminal networks so we understand where money's flowing and who's involved in different transactions, and helps us build that criminal intelligence that law enforcement can use to make charges.
We might touch on another topic for both of you. Often conveyancers may at times devalue their services, but now you will be taking on an added responsibility. Does that open the opportunity to increase charges, increase fees?
Absolutely. This is the time. I think as conveyancers, we are tax collectors, and now we're law enforcement officers. We've got multiple hats on, but they're very diligent people. They work really hard, and conveyancers are very task focused, and so they need to understand that the amount of time that they're going to need, be it with the starter kits or be it with however they go about this, but they're going to need extra time per file per client. It's not just really you might have a client where they've got a trust attached. You need to investigate. You need to look into all that. You need to make sure that all of that is you've ticked off to comply, and that you've ticked off to make sure that you feel satisfied as a practitioner. So don't undervalue and undersell what you do. And, absolutely should be time for everyone to think of putting their fees up and really making sure that they're that they are accounting for that. Absolutely.
What would you like to add on that, Jennie?
Well, I think for too long, conveyancers have been treated almost like we're settlement agents. In this country, conveyancers in this country, certainly in our states, we do the exact same amount of work and take on the exact same risk that a lawyer does. We do the exactly same conveyancing work. So we not only take the risk, we've now got the additional burden of both state and federal requirements on top of that, which just adds more risk to us. So we need to probably have the general public understand those additional things that we're now taking on, so they understand why our prices need to increase. And we have to believe that we own it, that we've earned it and we own it, and we earned it every day. We earn it every day with the amount of files that we deal with in order to make a living. If I could charge an agent commission on a conveyance, I would be doing 1/10 of the work I do, but that's not the case. So that is our perfect opportunity for us now to market and ourselves and let people understand what it is that we're being asked to take on. And I would hope AUSTRAC will help us, give that information to the general public as to what's coming, what will be asked of them. It's more than just a verification of identity check now. We do need to ask more questions, and they need to know that that's coming and that they will need to provide it.
So a lot of the general public will include new clients if conveyancers file suspicious matters. are they obligated to then continue with that transaction? What does it look like with the client relationship, protecting staff, and then not, I guess, tipping off the clients?
We will upgrade our cost agreements in terms of what is required and what they must provide. Now, my attitude towards that is if through your checking, your client check, you feel that it's suspicious, but they're giving you everything that allows you to complete a conveyance, you should continue to do so, because if you don't, then I think that is a bit of a tip-off. But if they're refusing to give you the information you need to be able to complete your know your client or check your source of funds, then your cost agreement should have a paragraph that allows you to cease acting, because then you can't fulfill your obligations. So that's my recommendation to our members, that we will bolster our cost agreement around that.
And what do you believe suspicious transactions look like beyond, say, the obvious large cash deposit? What are some non-financial red flags that conveyancers will now be expected to identify and then report?
I think it comes down to identification checks, because people are already wary about doing identity checks and doing identity checks through their phone, and what they're putting out there that people can get access to. I think where they're unable to give you two forms of photo identification and are reluctant to give you a birth certificate or a Medicare card, or there might be different names, documents might be in different names, then I would consider that to be probably suspicious. But if they give you all that information and their money's coming from CBA into my Westpac Trust account, how can I see that as suspicious? I don't know the answer to that yet as to how I determine that. But if it's already gone through the checks of one bank to go into my bank, I'm not quite sure I would consider that a suspicious activity.
Do you have anything on providing those answers?
Yeah, sure do. We expect the bulk of your clients to be low risk. We make the assumption that most real estate transactions in Australia don't involve money launderers or illicit finance. And so the bulk of the clients that we expect conveyancers to be dealing with should be low-risk clients where you won't see any suspicion, nor should you see any suspicion. They're regular people doing regular real estate transactions. What we ask you to do is to cast your mind to those things that seem unusual. So if someone is refusing to provide you with sources of identity, I mean, real estate transactions are often the largest purchase a person will make in their life. It's not too much to think that you need to prove who you say you are to make that kind of a transaction. But if someone refuses to do that, that might be a cause for suspicion. We do see money being laundered through company structures. So if you're being approached by somebody and you can't really see who the real client is or who the beneficiary of that transaction is, and that's being obfuscated or hidden, that can often be a cause of suspicion. If financial dealings are coming from a third party and you can't really tell who that third party is, that's often a cause for suspicion. But what we never really do is ask people to stop transactions. So it's really important to know we get hundreds of thousands of suspicious matter reports from banks every year, hundreds of thousands of them, and most of those involve transactions that continue. There's something in that transaction to be suspicious about, but there's not necessarily enough in that transaction for someone to realise that there's a criminal activity underneath that transaction. It's just a suspicion. And so you can still proceed with that transaction if you form a suspicion, but it's a matter for yourself and for individual practitioners as to what they want to do. If you're knowingly dealing with a criminal and you're knowingly dealing with the proceeds of crime, that's an offence anyway. Like that's an offence under Australian laws now, and you shouldn't be doing that, and you shouldn't be transacting in that way. What we're talking about is where you've got a suspicion that's possibly not enough to result in a police report, but where you're suspicious about the person, you're suspicious about their source of wealth, and you might be suspicious about their kinds of activity, put in a suspicious matter report to us.
Now, in preparation for this podcast, we have asked conveyancers nationwide to submit their own questions. Some of those answers may have already been addressed, but Mr. Thomas, Brendan, we'll start with you. Staff training, what does that look like? What is considered adequate training?
Yeah. There are really a couple of things that the training should focus on. One is the know your customer check. So making sure people are doing those effectively and they're satisfying themselves that they know who the person is that they're dealing with. Secondly is training around understanding what those red flags are. So what are the things that should cause a suspicion and how might we put in a suspicious matter report to AUSTRAC? What form does that take? What are the kinds of things that we should include in that kind of suspicious matter report? They're two key elements that we'd ask people to be trained in. There might be other elements of a program that a business might have depending on the complexity of that business that you might want to train people in. But those know your customer checks is really the key to the AML regime, and then knowing what to do when you form a suspicion.
So if I'm acting for a purchaser who is just buying a property, they're a cash buyer, how do I check source of funds?
Well, it depends if that buyer causes you to be suspicious. So if you know who that person is, you're satisfied you know who that person is, you're satisfied you know their course of business, it makes sense for that person to come and purchase with cash, and you've got no reason to be suspicious as to why they're doing that, then you don't need to check their source of funds. The key threshold here is the suspicion. So if you're dealing with someone that you don't know and you're not sure or not completely confident they are who they say they are, and it doesn't look right that they have the wealth they have to purchase a property, they don't, I can give you an example. We had a case last year where we had one family with connections to people on the Interpol red list that bought $170 million worth of property in Sydney. One of those purchases was $35 million and the person's stated occupation was a housewife. That should have raised suspicion everywhere. It didn't because there was no requirement to do that, but it should have. And you can try and establish the source of that person's wealth. I can guarantee in this case that person wouldn't have provided any information about that. That should then form the basis of a suspicious matter report to us. The source of wealth check is for you to satisfy that suspicion. So if you try and establish the source of wealth of a person, and you can do that, and you're satisfied that this looks like a legitimate source of wealth and it allays your suspicion, then you don't really need to do anything else.
So if I get an identity check and that identity check tells me, provides two forms of photo ID that are current, the facial recognition is 99% correct, the address is correct on all the identification, I would be comfortable not to have to go further to check source of funds?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So just going back onto that scenario you just provided with the housewife buying a $35 million property. So from a practitioner standpoint, we obviously will verify the client, but really are you sort of suggesting that conveyancers should be saying to the client, well, where did you get this money from? Because, you can't really say because they're a housewife and, so I'm just trying to understand sort of how the practitioner would have known that was a suspicious activity, because really they would have checked and balanced everything on our end. And so how is it that our practitioners, or how do we go back to our practitioners and tell them that you need to, check say, for example, like you said, the housewife buying a $35 million property. That I'm just trying to understand how we would have known to say that was or report it as a suspicious activity.
Yeah, so this is probably an extreme case, but in this case, a short internet search would have highlighted the family connections this person had with known criminal organisations. The person was coming from an overseas high-risk crime jurisdiction, and they had $35 million worth of cash that they were putting down on a property in a very expensive part of Sydney. Some questions about what that person does for a living, where they get their wealth from, and if the person is a legitimate purchaser, those are pretty easy questions to answer. If you can't get straight answers out of that person and you can't establish that source of wealth by reasonable means, we don't ask you to be a detective. We don't ask you to be a financial crime detective. You've got no legal authority to demand information from people. We just ask you to do what's reasonable to try and satisfy yourself that you don't continue to have that suspicion. But if you can't satisfy yourself through reasonable checks, that's when you put in the suspicious matter report to us.
Right. So it could be a legitimate housewife buying a property.
Could well be.
It could well be, but okay, right. Yeah. So it's if we get that feeling of a suspicion.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Suspicion is the threshold. And the red flags that we'll provide you will help establish those causes of suspicion.
Excellent.
Did you want to?
And they're the ones that are coming through in January.
Yes, and they'll constantly be coming through from us. We'll continue to update those as we get more and more information about the nature of crime and the red flags that conveyancers are seeing and reporting to us.
There's been a lot of talk through real estate institutes about sharing information, identity checks and asset searches and so forth where it applies. We, as a legal industry, I suppose we're a little bit concerned about breach of privacy in providing that information to another party, and also not wanting to be connected to an agent should an agent be a rogue and be found that way. Is that encouraged by AUSTRAC to do? The purposes of, I can see, is to try and save the client from having to do duplicates of things. But has AUSTRAC sort of landed on what that should be or whether that should be allowed?
So the legislation allows for the information to flow through the course of the transaction. So it can be the case where a bank might do customer due diligence on a particular client, and that bank's diligence activity can flow with that client to other parties through the course of the transaction where it doesn't have to be done again. The law allows for that to happen, but it only allows for that to happen where there's an agreement in place between those parties about how that information might be managed, how that information can flow, and in fact that the information actually does flow. Mm-hmm. So it's not enough for a party to a transaction to say, well, the bank's done that, I don't have to do that. So long as the information does flow to that party, that's enough. So the law allows for it to happen, but it doesn't mandate it.
Okay. But what's been flowing through, is that certified copies of what the bank's done, or is that just copies? Because I'm not quite sure we could say we could rely on a copy of a document to complete that task.
Yeah, so if a bank satisfies itself that it knows who that customer is and it's done its diligence around that customer and it asserts that it's satisfied according to AML law, that it's satisfied that person is who it says it is, you can take that assertion and the documents that flow with it to establish your diligence so long as it's a low-risk customer. But it depends on your own preference. As a practitioner, if you want to do it yourself, then certainly do it yourself. There's nothing that mandates you having to take somebody else's assertion around that.
What are the record-keeping requirements overall? From how long? What's the format?
Yeah, so we ask you to keep one record of your money laundering program. We ask you to keep records of how you've satisfied yourself of a person's identity. So our regime doesn't require you to keep those documents. It requires you to keep a record that you've satisfied yourself. So if you look at a person's birth certificate and their driver's license and you say, I'm satisfied that this person is who they say they are, that's the record that you keep. We don't require you to keep those documents, but to keep that record. And if you're forming grounds of suspicion and reporting a suspicious matter to us, you should keep a record of that. You should keep a record of the training that your staff do. And if you're a company that's providing reports to a board or to a senior executive on the performance of a money laundering program, you should be keeping records of those things. For bigger companies that we regulate, we like to see their board papers where they've been considering their AML program, where they're looking at their risks and where they're looking at their compliance. That's for larger programs that do have for larger companies that are doing those kinds of board reports. We like to see that, and we ask for them to keep those kinds of records.
So just to be clear, so from a conveyance or a legal and a practitioner's standpoint, what you need or what you require, so when we go back in 3 years and get these audits done, the audit will only require us to show them if we've made a suspicious activity, they want to see that we've got the right documentation. Is that what the requirements will be?
Yeah, and showing us that you're satisfied your clients are who they say they are. So you should keep a record that you've satisfied yourself that this person is who they say they are.
So that's all we need to keep.
That basically one page.
Satisfied.
So
we might have a tick box system. Or
you'll get that in your starter program.
So that's all we need to have in our...
Unless you form a suspicion.
Oh, yes. So I'm talking about the...
For the bulk of people who are low risk, regular people doing regular real estate transactions, that's right.
Okay.
We did touch on this, but overall, if honest mistakes are made, will there be guidance rather than immediate penalties?
Always from us. So we assume most people want to comply with the law. Sometimes people don't exactly know how to do that, or they don't do it well, or they come across new circumstances that they don't understand. Our approach always with all the businesses that we currently regulate is to work with them to help them comply with the law. We only take regulatory action when people continue to refuse to comply with the law, when they turn a complete blind eye to their legal obligations, or where they might be overtly criminal. We do have criminals running some of the businesses that we get involved in, or where they're directly profiting from crime and turning a blind eye to that.
Jennie and Shakila, we have spoken on a few of the concerns, but what are maybe other feelings on the ground? You're speaking to your constituents often. What are other kind of reactions to what will happen when the Tranche 2 reforms come into play?
I think there's a little bit of concern around the audits, but I think Brendan's been able to sort of touch on that because people are not sure what's required, and obviously it's new, and they're hearing a lot of things, and the concern around if they do miss a date or if they do miss something, the heavy penalties that will be applied. So I think there's been a lot of noise around that from our members in Victoria, and then the unknown of just making sure how we're going to put this into practice, which will come as we progress down the line.
Just to assure your members, if you want to have a look at our website, there's a section on our website that lists all of the enforcement action we've taken.
Yes.
And if people want to go and have a look at that, you can see that we've never taken action against small businesses who are slightly missing deadlines and not filling in the right forms. You won't see those cases there because we don't do that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of our members are 1 to 2 man operations, so they would be they'd have to be managing the suspicion. They have to do it all. So you could see that they want to rest assured that if they do miss something, that they will be not penalised.
Yeah, we expect the bulk of your clients to be low-risk people as regular citizens doing regular commercial transactions. But when you do deal with organised crime and money launderers, they're professionals at what they do. And I say this when I speak to the boards of Australia's biggest banks, is we expect people to try and launder money through them, and we expect some of those people to be successful. That's the nature of the criminal organisations that we work with. What we do ask people to do is put their best efforts into trying to comply with the law and trying to understand suspicion and report it when they see it.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Jennie?
I suppose what I'm hearing is the cost to business. They're very small businesses with very small profit margins, if any. They run off the smell of an oily rag, really. And yes, we do need to get our fees up to help cover the cost of setup and ongoing compliance. But I am hearing that there is discussion about a levy being imposed on us for doing this work, which I'm a little bit confused as to why we would be charged to do the work for AUSTRAC.
The government has a levy at the moment for businesses that we regulate. We regulate, as I said, about 19,000 businesses. About 200 of those businesses currently pay a levy. So at the moment, only businesses that earn more than $200 million pay a levy to AUSTRAC.
Which can afford it.
That's right.
Mm.
The levy is set by the government, so the government will consider any changes to the levy through the course of the next year, but that hasn't been determined. But I think it would be highly unlikely for small businesses to face any kind of money laundering levy.
It's going to be very hard for us to get our members on board if they're being asked to pay for doing something for someone else.
Yeah.
That's just the reality. Mm.
So from what you're saying is that the government do have a levy for some industries, but there's a threshold on the turnover, is that, or is it? So
there has been a levy for some time on businesses that fall under money laundering regulation. That threshold at the moment sits at $200 million. So the vast bulk of those businesses, we regulate 19,000 businesses. There are 200 that pay a levy. So 18,800 don't pay any levy at all.
I wish I could. Otherwise, I'd have to become a money launderer.
Don't do that.
I think that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining the first edition of Settlement Day. Stay tuned for the next episode, and please keep an eye out on updates on AUSTRAC's website, your AIC division, and of course the Australian Conveyancer website. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
See you next time.